Hi, welcome to the new episode of Startup Strides. Today, my guest is Mary Zedler. She's an investor at Verge HealthTech Fund. Welcome, Mary.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much for making time. All right, we have questions to go through, discussion around health tech to be had. But as it's per tradition, I'm going to ask you to, give us introduction about your background, yourself, what you're doing right now. Go ahead, stage is yours.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. So, if I start from the beginning, I guess I've always been curious about the human body because of my background in competitive sports. And that led me to study biomedical science and neuroscience in my undergrad. And in my undergrad, I worked a lot with sensors for the human brain. So, just electrodes. And that got me more curious about the technology. So, I studied sensor technology in Cambridge. And then during that program, I enjoyed a few pivots. So I delved a bit into plant sciences, cellular agriculture, geophysics. I also developed an optoelectronic sensor for measuring plant stress, but I didn't end up commercializing the product because probably I'm just more excited about human health than plant health. But I also worked in an impact-driven nonprofit then. And afterwards, I really wanted to tie everything together. So, my love for impact, human health, and technological progress. So, I joined an impact health VC, and my background in sensor tech and biomed and neuro is really helpful for that. So, now, as you said, I work for Verge HealthTech Fund, and we're an early stage impact fund, and we specialize in health tech. So, the fund is based in Singapore, but we invest globally in early stages from the US all the way to Africa.
That's really cool. Just a quick question. I guess, what do you like about Verge Health Tech? What makes you unique?
Yeah, great question. So I would say probably the team because we are so global. For me, that's super exciting to learn from people in Asia and people who had a lot of exposure to emerging markets or the American market. Previously, I've worked for a German health fund where the companies that we looked at were a bit more European or German-speaking country specific. So I really like the global perspective that we have and that all of the people who are part of the fund have really a lot of experience in healthcare specifically. So that's great for me to learn and also for the founders to learn from their experience.
That's very fair. When we think of health tech, I feel like it's such an expansive term. It can cover anything, right? From diagnostic tools to like aura rings, really anything. For somebody who isn't deep in the space, who's not investing or building, how would you explain what health tech means?
Sure. So health tech is the newest but also fastest growing vertical within the healthcare sector. So health tech is basically any technology that amplifies an aspect of the healthcare system or your own state of health. So to be more specific, as you mentioned already, a few of those, at Verge, we divide health tech into specific subsectors, such as next generation diagnostics, AI and analytics, smart devices, digital health platforms, digital therapeutics, and healthcare SaaS. And in that, health tech is really different from the three traditional sectors of healthcare. And those would be biotech, medtech, and services. So yeah, health tech is really any technology that improves how healthcare is delivered or accessed or managed.
So medtech is not included within health tech.
So for us, medtech in the traditional sense, no, but medtech that can be used outside of the hospital walls,
Mhm.
that's something we are still interested in because that's very scalable and improves access to healthcare.
Got it. So I guess scalable nature of it
Yeah.
does. When you read news, and I guess when you go on endpoint news and etc., there's a lot of like, especially in the US, there's like a lot of hype around biotech. A lot of capital flowing, a lot of flashy exits, a lot of fundraising happening. And maybe it's just my kind of not a broad horizon I have, so feel free to correct me. But I feel like very rarely, except for a few exceptions, right? Like Aura Ring that raised a lot of funding recently, became like $11 billion dollar company. We don't really hear a lot of these massive health tech stories in terms of like diagnostics or digital therapeutics. Do you think it's true? Do you think that kind of like gap exists? And do you think if that gap exists, that perception kind of affects how capital is deployed?
So I'm biased. I only see the health tech news. Not
Mm,
only, but that's mostly what I read. But I think you're right. So I think that's probably because biotech has a longer history, whereas, as I said, health tech is quite new. But also, biotech focuses on classic breakthroughs. So a new molecule or a new device. The milestones are very binary
mm,
and easy for the outside world to celebrate, whereas health tech is more focusing on systems level change rather than single eureka moments, you know. So all of the subsectors that we mentioned above, they are all about improving affordability, accessibility, and quality of healthcare. So improving processes, which isn't really as flashy or single breakthrough moment as in biotech. So that's why I think it's a bit more quieter impact, but I think it's where a lot of long-term value lies.
I think it makes sense. In biotech, you see clear milestones like past the phase one, phase two, phase three, versus in health tech, it's like there is an impact, but can you like specifically measure like how big is it and what's happening? So that's actually a very nice perspective. I guess I want to bring it from more macro to more micro level and like ask you about, when you look at and evaluate your startups, early stage health tech startups, what makes you think, okay, this is it? I guess what qualities or signals tend to trigger that instinct where you're like, okay, this is the company I want to invest in.
Okay. So I think for me, the biggest point would be that it has to clearly solve an unmet need in healthcare. So it shouldn't be a technology push, it should be a clinical need-based pull. Let me give you two examples. So you're probably familiar with 23andMe, and they really leveraged affordable genome sequencing to then develop consumer use cases. But they never really found sustainable product market fit. And I think the science is still fascinating, but it didn't really stick as a product because there isn't a really strong need, or not the need is not clearly defined enough. So they've been struggling and the share prices have been falling a lot. But then on the other hand, if you take a company like Dexcom, who developed continuous glucose monitoring, they really focused on diabetic patients and clinicians' need for real-time data. There was glucose monitoring before, but their devices really showed exponential improvements to previous standards of care. So yeah, I think, as I said, so making sure that there's an unmet need where people are willing to pay for a solution, that's the biggest one. And then at Verge, we really like to see an experienced team with proven track record in healthcare. So teams that have deep exposure into healthcare and know how this system works. Because we think that outsiders have it much harder to understand healthcare. You can still succeed, but it's much harder to understand the complexities of healthcare, how reimbursement happens, what the incentives are. And yeah, so you need to make sure you can embed your insights into the existing structure.
Actually,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, go ahead, finish.
Maybe as a last point, but that's probably applicable to all VCs, is commercial traction. So
Mm.
if you can already see that a lot of people want to use the solution and are willing to pay for it, then that's the obvious signal that there's something there.
Got it. So essentially, if we could summarize, would be commercial, it would be the team's expertise, and also, what was the third point you said?
An unmet need.
Unmet need. There's some unmet needs which, like, I guess, as a follow-up question I was going to ask, that don't really have a huge market, right? But you might come across some like really exciting science, and you're like, in theory, looks perfect, this looks great, but this company like will gonna be commercially successful. How do you navigate that? How do you like approach that? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, so difficult. I guess it's due to the fact that scientists mostly do research based on curiosity and not because they want to sell anything. But if you want to build a business, that's unfortunately not enough. So, yeah, as I said before, there has to be a large unmet need if you want to get VC funding. So, yeah, so that it's not an exciting piece of technology that no one is ready to pay for. And often this goes hand in hand with having someone on the team who knows how to do business, or at least have strong advisors who have commercial experience.
Got
Does
it.
that answer the question?
That does answer the question. You mentioned reimbursements and regulations. I think healthcare is one of those things. It's very scaling is generally tougher than a lot of other areas because there's like such a stringent regulation, rightfully so. You're dealing with human lives, and there are different rules and regulations in different places, like versus America, UK, Europe, right? And you said, obviously, when you invest in a company, the perspective is it needs to become kind of like a more global company, right? That's the venture scale. And so many startups in this space aim to improve global access to care, but scaling across like regulatory, cultural access and infrastructure, it can be quite hard. How do you assess, whether a team can realistically kind of deliver on that ambition?
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting question. So when we look at teams who want to deliver impact in, let's say, neglected markets or underserved markets like low and middle income countries, we really make sure they meet the criteria of a concept that I learned in grad school, which is known as inclusive innovation. And I would describe it as innovate together with the people you want to innovate for. So if we are looking at a startup that wants to improve, let's say, pregnancy care and maternal health in Africa, we probably wouldn't invest in a founder team that's fully male and has never set foot in Africa. So we try to make sure there's a problem founder fit. So ideally, the people who solve this problem have lived experience, have lived and worked in the healthcare system that they're trying to innovate in, because there are so many barriers and different systems, as you described initially.
That's very interesting. Actually, this finally reminds me of Flow's history because Flow's founded by two brothers. Right? It's very random. It's very interesting. In terms of what you said, are there any examples of startups, perhaps from your portfolios, that navigated those challenges well and did a good job?
Yeah, I think one example that I really like is Reach 52 from our portfolio. Basically, they try to reach the 52% of the world who cannot access essential healthcare products and services. It's a huge number.
Why 52?
52 is literally the percentage of the world population that cannot access essential healthcare products.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a huge number. And they've developed a tech-enabled platform that connects rural communities with healthcare workers and pharmacies. And they operate currently in 7 different countries across Asia and Africa and are already helping millions of people. And what they've done is they are officially based in Singapore, but Ed, the CEO, and his team, they spent a very significant amount of time in the countries that they are operating in. And they also have local leaders in those countries so that they can make sure they understand the local systems, local communities, the local incentives, and the people who are being served. So that's really important for us.
Got it. You mentioned Singapore, so I want to ask a very quick follow-up question. Obviously, the known hubs for health tech innovations, US, Europe, UK. But outside of these hubs, like, are there, because you're so much familiar and you guys are a global company, are there other hubs outside of these three that are doing really good job actually innovating in health tech space?
Yeah, so maybe not to fully answer your question, but to give you some points. I see a lot of health tech hubs popping up everywhere. So that could be in Slovenia or in Estonia. So one of our partners has founded Health Tech Founders Estonia, which is just it's a tiny country, but it's a great hub of people who are trying to innovate in the health tech space and really bring together all of those people who are interested in the space. So everywhere, or almost everywhere, new hubs are springing up currently.
In one of our conversations, you mentioned your interest in women's health, and I feel like there's overall growing focus in shift in focus towards that too. I'm curious about like what are your thoughts in regards to that? I guess what areas within women's health you think are underserved or most ripe for innovation? What are your personal interest areas too? I guess.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for diving into that with me. So, I mean, first of all, I guess women's health overall is probably very underserved and under innovated. But if we look at the life cycle of a woman, there are lots of different issues one can encounter. So, if I walk you through the timeline, I guess the first thing that can happen is you struggle finding the right contraception, you have hormonal problems, then you can have issues with fertility, and that receives more attention at the moment. So that's great. And then you can also have chronic gynecological disorders like endometriosis. You might be familiar with that, but it affects 1 in 10 women, which is a crazy statistic. And there isn't a good treatment option, just surgery, which doesn't have good success rates. So there's a huge area that suffers from a lack of innovation. And then we see that you can also have a lot of complications during pregnancies, also complications that can lead to death, such as preeclampsia. Then later in the life of a woman, you can have problems during menopause. And also there are conditions that are not only affecting women, but predominantly. So that could be dementia, osteoporosis, and female-specific cancers. But to give you a more specific example that I'm excited about, around 800 women each day, on average, die from pregnancy-related complications. So in high-income countries, we've brought that number down by a lot. So the mortality ratio is relatively low. But in low-income countries, the rate of maternal deaths is 40 times higher, which is insane to me. So in high-income countries, the decline of maternal mortality has mostly been due to the adoption of practices to prevent it, and that's usually just supervision by trained medical staff. But in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the health staff coverage is just very, very low. So that's why we're excited about health tech in that space, because we think a health tech can really provide solutions to extend clinical reach where health staff coverage is very low. Yeah, maternal health is one of those areas where I think it's very underserved, very under-innovated, and I hope a lot of new solutions are coming up.
From VC perspective, from investor perspective, what makes investing in those areas? So, you already mentioned a couple of the societal issues, but I'm guessing there's some scientific challenges, there's some data challenges too, right? What kind of things was investors and I guess founders need to be aware of, keep in mind when dealing?
Right. So I guess you probably know that it's really also a struggle to get hold of good data sets in women's health, because historically women have just been very underrepresented in clinical research. So yeah, often founders just need to rebuild evidence bases. Yeah, so for startups that need training data, often we see that the main challenge is just to collect and label data, because there are also very few experts that are able to label data. And then from an investor perspective and a founder perspective, sometimes there is a chicken and egg problem. Let's take endometriosis as an example again. So if you're not familiar, it's like a chronic disease that takes 7 to 10 years to diagnose. So diagnosis is a huge issue, but also there's no treatment, as I mentioned before. And because there are no effective treatment options, investors are often very hesitant to fund diagnostics. And because we lack good diagnostics, it's hard to advance treatments. So it's a vicious cycle, and I think it's a cycle we need to break. I also don't really have the solution, but yeah, it's difficult.
Wow, I actually never thought about it. So obviously, if you don't have the diagnostics, treating is hard. If you can't read it, that's very interesting. Endometriosis, actually, funnily enough, was one of the earliest episodes I've done for my podcast.
Oh wow, great. Okay, so you have
Dr. Dora Keller, she was co-founder of Endocare Therapeutics. I need to reach out to her to see. Hopefully, she's doing well. They were trying to develop sort of biomarker diagnostics for endometriosis, and that's when I realized it actually takes 7 to 10 years. You need surgery; it's very painful, and it can cause infertility, and other issues too. And what you said about the data saying is also very much like true, because I'm trying to remember, I had another women's health startup. It was more on kind of around the hormonal kind of tracking, and that's when I realized that it's hard to train even AI because there's not enough data. So you have to collect it and you have to annotate it and then train it. So in a way, it's a huge challenge. In a way, it's also kind of creates this chance to develop your proprietary data sets and really distinguish yourself from others. And I'm happy to hear more thoughts you have on that. Another question I had is there's a bit of a negative connotation around femtech. Some people don't like that term, it feels like it's very diminishing. It takes it out of health tech and perhaps might even affect the capital deployment in that direction. What's your feeling? What's your thought around that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, I guess femtech sounds a bit more like it's not within health tech, it's a separate area, but I mean, it's 50% of the population. And I guess historically, like the lack of data that I mentioned, part of the problem is also that decision making, people in decision making power have been historically male. So you probably know the statistics that I think 2% of funding goes to all female founding teams, while 80% of investment partners at major funds are still men. So I think increasing the number of female fund managers, but also clinicians and data scientists in decision-making roles, I think that will really reshape what gets funded and studied. And I also think reports like the McKinsey study that gets cited very often that highlighted femtech as a $1 trillion opportunity. I think those are great because it gets awareness to the problem. But on the other hand, I actually think that we don't need many more reports describing the problem and the gender gap. I think what we really need is more success stories in the space. So just like telehealth went mainstream after Teladoc, for example, I think women's health really needs some proof points to show that this is also an area with commercial scale and impact, showing strong exits to prove that this is not an area of philanthropy. That would be great. Yeah, so mostly execution and proof. I think we're getting there. And then hopefully we'll see that the health of 50% of the world's population is not niche, but a very investable part of healthcare.
Well, hopefully one of the companies you invest in, Mary, ends up being that significant proof point.
Hopefully, yeah.
With AI, things are changing rapidly. It's being integrated into everything from diagnostics, from like digital therapeutics, from really anything, really. How do you feel? What are the main areas you see, I guess you're excited about in terms of AI integration? And I guess my next question would be like, what areas you're not that excited? You think it's a bit overhyped, but mostly I want to hear more about the parts, the sectors, the areas that you're really excited with AI integration.
Great, yeah. So maybe what I think is overrated is AI therapists. I think we see a lot of those, especially in the last year. I've seen a lot of AI therapists. I think it's an exciting concept, and I genuinely hope that some of those models will succeed. But in general, I think that they will probably struggle to deliver results comparable to human psychologists. Maybe they will work well for guided CBT or triage, but I doubt they can replace psychologists. And not all of them want to replace them, just augment them. But yeah, so that's, I think, very crowded right now. What I want to see more of, and where I see only a few startups at the moment, is basically AI for disease progression and early detection, predicting who will get sick and when before symptoms are obvious to a doctor. So some of the startups we see build foundational models for disease progression on an individual level, and some of them do this on a population level to discover new targets for pharma companies, for example. So what I really mean is, I think we can see very obviously that we have loads and loads of data, especially because we get more data from sensors. We all have wearables nowadays and lots of data in biobanks and EHRs. But I think the connection between the data and the actual disease progression is still unclear. And I think that's the missing link to really try and learn from this ubiquitous data that we have. And AI has so much potential and machine learning in that aspect because it can integrate messy, longitudinal real-world data from genomics, EHRs, biobanks, and then hopefully detect nonlinear patterns that we can't really see as doctors or other people in the health system. So yeah, I hope that this will change preventive medicine. So instead of treating diseases very late, we'll be able to predict it much earlier.
That's very cool. Do you think we need integration of data from multimodal sources or unimodal sources too?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as much as we can. As I said, genomics will be important, but also lifestyle data, electronic health records, maybe even tissue samples. I think all of it will be useful. I'm not sure what of those data points will be the most important ones for predicting disease progression. But yeah, I would say at first use everything we can.
Okay. Are there certain indications you're very much excited about? I mean, cancer tends to be typically the go-to answer, but I'm curious if there are any other indications that you're really excited about.
Probably chronic diseases like diabetes, blood pressure, high blood pressure. Those are the areas that are probably very promising for AI models.
Got it. Mary, I want to ask a question about, when you come across these cool technologies in science, obviously you have a science background, you have a really good understanding of your own area, sensor technology and stuff. But sometimes you might come across technologies that are very much outside of what you're used to, you see, or you have to sort of form your own understanding before you can go look for certain startups, right? How do you approach this constant studying and learning and just forming your own opinions while also looking for companies to invest in?
Interesting. I guess I just try to learn regularly. So I actually do this in a semi-structured way. So whenever I come across topics that I'm unfamiliar with, I note it down. And then at some point I set myself a reminder, hey, dive deeper into this topic and really get to know the space so that I don't miss out on any learnings.
Got it. I guess, we are coming towards the end of our episode, and I want to ask more reflection-based questions because you're looking at your LinkedIn. You've got experience, obviously, in the lab. You worked at a startup. Now you are in venture space, so you have a careers that span science, technology, and investing. Right? Looking back, what surprised you most about how innovation actually happens?
Okay, so I think the process is fairly similar. So it's very iterative and hypothesis driven. But then I think the fundamental difference is that commercialization or innovation is not just curiosity driven, but has an outcome in mind, similar to what I mentioned before, that there has to be an unmet need. And in science, we assume that innovation just comes from discovery, like a new molecule or a new algorithm. But I guess I realized that discovery is only the start of it. And the actual innovation happens when that science then meets the urgent need and when a founder figures out how to get that breakthrough into people's hands through figuring out the regulatory pathway, the distribution, and the business model.
And I guess finally, there might be some scientists, PhDs, or students watching this episode and wanting to build something in health tech. What advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess I focused a lot on this theme today, but I would really advise people to try and understand problems very deeply and not technologies only. And yeah, try and see what the world needs and where you'd like to contribute with your skills and knowledge instead of just focusing on the next interesting tech trend that you're interested in. That would be my piece of advice.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. This was a wonderful and insightful episode. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.